Hi, welcome back. I'm Ian Pratt, Global Head of Security for Commercial Systems at HP. I'm joined today by Siobhan Noel.
Hi, Ian. Shirban Noam, responsible for our business and strategy here at HP Security. After the acquisition of Bromium in September, we've created this new group that you lead. And thank you very much for having me on today.
So, we all know that despite everyone's best efforts to keep bad guys out, sometimes it happens. Sometimes you end up with, with badness happening within your endpoint, within your network environment, and that might be as a result of malware. It might result of even a malicious insider. But I think there are particular challenges right now with everyone working remotely, including the admins. And what are your thoughts about how you can continue to maintain operational integrity, even when you're in a compromised state?
Yeah, that's a complex area, and hopefully we can dilute it down to about 10 minutes of talk. I think most enterprises today, they're looking at the fact that their users are not on site. They don't have the same level of controls and visibility that they would be afforded when their users are behind the corporate firewall. And I think the biggest challenge a user has to face each day is they're not necessarily doing anything other than working on what is today's edge, the endpoint. And as they're looking at doing their work, and to your point, they could be determined insider, but for the most part, let's assume that 95, 97% of the time, the threats come from outside. If the enterprise doesn't have visibility into the device and the device itself gets owned, then when I connect to the VPN, there's this challenge, because attackers know that remote users today have to connect to enterprise resources, the backplane via VPN, and then the VPN is only going to afford the enterprise a wonderful, secure connection to that unencrypted backplane. And so now, if we can't find a way, perhaps it's in zero trust, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But imagine I'm an admin and I'm trying to administer my network fabric and other enterprise tools, and my device is owned. What's to keep the attacker from moving laterally from that compromised host onto the back end, or installing keyloggers and screen scrapers and the like? And of course, this does happen, and you and I have seen this happen. And operational integrity in a compromised state, what that really means is, how do I maintain my business or my mission? How do I make sure that I have a way of defining trust in such a way that I can continue doing my work, and that I am able to prohibit an attacker who's trying to persist on my device and either exfiltrate data, destroy data, modify data. We've seen that a couple times, right? Where suddenly now we have to be able to provide some level of integrity. And the work that you and I have done over the past decade plus has really been around, how do we reduce the attack surface and define least privilege to such a point where we are minimizing what an attacker can do and has access to at any given point. And with the admins today having to do everything remotely as well, you can only imagine that's going to be a problem, right?
Yeah, because we've both seen it so many times where when you look at the attacks, the ones which are the really expensive ones to deal with, the ones where not the ransomware and things like that, but the ones that really matter. The way they go down so often is it's all about getting onto the machine of an administrator. You just get onto their endpoint and then just wait for them to log in to administer something of high value, whether that's a high value tier 0 server, or you can hit the jackpot of waiting for someone to log into a domain controller, and and then even if it's just an RDP connection to the domain controller, we've all seen how that can then get remote controlled to then insert something into the main controller as a backdoor. And it is so hard to get someone out of your environment if they've ever managed to get into the domain controller at that level and insert backdoors, it's a complete rebuild at that point. And
Yeah.
even
Yeah,
then,
it's a rip and replace. The eviction process is horrible, and one of the things that we've been, you and I have been on a number of calls and discussions with leaders both in the federal space and on the commercial side, where their number one objective is how do I limit the amount of access anybody has at any given point, and then I'm able to actually measure and attest the integrity of the devices of the user, that it's actually the right device, it hasn't been compromised, and before I get in. Right. If I look at VPN, access today, it's just a function of, have I inputted the right credentials, and that's not really a very modern approach. I'll ask you, just because you've been doing this for some time, what's a modern approach toward ensuring that the device itself is what it is supposed to be, that the user is doing the right things, or that it's actually clean. What's a modern way of looking at that?
Yeah, well, I think, for folks that are just using a VPN in the most basic way of just, dropping someone off into the, as though they were back in the office, as though their endpoint was sitting in the office and they're now on, the corporate network. That's a huge wasted opportunity, because you can do a lot more, using the VPN, as a point to enforce exactly what that combination of machine and user are allowed to do. And we can actually do a better job of securing things, moving to a more fine-grained approach to access control, than just dropping them off on the corporate network. And of course, you can be implementing that kind of approach, ideally, across all of your networks. But the VPN is kind of a convenient point to do that. It's actually arguably easier to do right now, where everyone is working remotely, connecting in via a VPN, where you can actually implement controls at the VPN to see, what service is this user trying to connect to? Can we, make sure we've identified the user robustly? What device are they connecting from? Let's make use of a robust way of identifying the device that can't be, easily or can't be transferred from one machine to another. So using the hardware built into the machine, or modern PCs have a trusted platform module. It's used the identity held in that trusted platform module to uniquely identify this machine, so we know that can't be taken and faked out on another machine. So we know that it's this machine, it's this user connecting to this application. And as you said before, perhaps looking at something to do with the security posture of the machine as well. When was it last patched? How did this machine boot? All of that information can be taken into account. And then with some of the techniques which we're now looking at of using virtualization, using a hypervisor running on the machine, you can then start taking that in an even more fine-grained fashion. So we could actually fire up a virtual machine to run an RDP client to connect you to that domain controller to administer it. And we can actually be able to attest that the RDP client is running within that virtual machine. We can attest the measurement of the virtual machine, so we know that it hasn't been tampered with.
But Ian, part of this has to be also that you want to find a way of persistence is a really funny thing, right? That's what the adversary wants to do. And we want to make sure that as we're building these service VMs, call it a VPN VM or maybe a Wi-Fi driver VPN, USB stack VPN, as we've talked around our zero trust endpoint architecture, we also have to make sure that these VMs themselves are pristine, in a known good state, that they boot and that they're measured. Those are, you look at the entire workflow of from the time the device is designed, built, imaged and deployed to a user. There is an element of having to leverage that underlying hardware and leverage an underlying platform security, and then layering on, the zero trust capabilities such that the VPN client or the VPN VM itself is in a known good state. I know you and I had talked to some folks around, could we take the Wi-Fi driver and run it in a VM and then recycle that every now and then? That way, there's a way of introspecting, right? And actually measuring and making sure that these VMs have not been compromised, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You need to leverage the hardware. That's why, we have on HP PCs this embedded controller, this extra CPU we put on every platform, which is the first thing that power is applied to, and its job is to cryptographically measure everything which is is in that boot sequence, to check that nothing has been tampered with, and only when it's happy that things haven't been tampered with, it can take the CPU out of the main CPU out of reset and let it go on to boot, and then we'll keep monitoring it as it continues to execute. So you can put these sort of hardware features, but build it into the platform to give you that that root of trust, to enable you to ensure the machine is booting securely. You can ensure, for example, that it then goes on to load the hypervisor. That hypervisor hasn't been tampered with. The hypervisor may then be running, Windows in one VM, and then as we start these trusted applications, this RDP client to connect to our domain controller, we can start that within a VM. And again, all this whole measurement process of knowing exactly what it is that we are booting, cryptographically measuring it, being able to store that information in the TPM, and then be able to attest to some remote service that it is actually running in this environment, to be able to make use of that ability to use the TPM to generate quotes that show that the system is currently as you're claiming it to be. That then enables you to really have confidence in the security posture of the, not even just the device, but the application that you're talking to, that that it's running within one of these protected environments, where even if the Windows OS running on the machine, the main Windows OS, the desktop OS that the user has logged into, has been compromised, we can know that the privacy, the confidentiality, and the integrity of this particular application we're talking to is assured, even if the underlying operating system is compromised.
Well, that's your operational integrity in a compromised state.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I think that as we're moving toward a more modern architecture, we're looking at zero trust, and we're looking at applying it for the various elements that actually run and maintain an enterprise. I think ultimately, if we can give broader visibility and controls to an enterprise at the endpoint, and these have been designed in, I really do think it's gonna make a big difference for most of our customers, and both the commercial side as well as the Fed and government side. I do think that what's interesting is most people don't know that this stuff exists. Right, and every time you and I are having conversations with the CIOs and the CISOs, and we talk about this work, which, by the way, you and I started working on many years ago. This has all been designed in, and you touched on making sure that we've got a measured boot at start. I think the other side of it is when there is a compromise. Right, we talked a lot about how to maintain that integrity and how to maintain the operational integrity in a compromised state. One of the things that is interesting is how does one recover very quickly, right? So we know that in a zero trust environment, we know that we can create these very secure VMs that allow us to have that secure connectivity. But what about the rest of the host, right? And there are technologies that are designed into hardware around our platform security solution set that allow an enterprise to actually recover the host from that compromised state. To administer the BIOS, in a secure way. These are the things that I think that most enterprises need to be aware of, and they will eventually, I think, in the next 2-3 years, become common practice. It just happens we're ahead of the challenge now. I think that's where we need to start focusing. What's been baked in, what's designed into the platform, and how do enterprises get to leverage it?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, these hardware features have been built in. But how many people are actually making use of them? It's a very good point. It's a limited set of organizations right now, but you really need to do so, because if being able to control, although a lot of people don't like to think about, BIOS configuration settings and things like that, but if you
It's a hot topic, by the way. Yeah.
don't configure them and lock them down, you're leaving yourself, hugely wide open to having issues, because
Right.
it's if you haven't locked those settings down, then it's very easy for malware to insert itself into the into the boot process. So part of the reasons why people haven't done that in the past is it's not been operationally easy. If you had to configure a BIOS password, there are perhaps you configured every machine with the same password. Perhaps if you were more sophisticated, you might have an Excel spreadsheet with the passwords for your 50,000 machines that you've set up. But it's not an easy thing to administer. And one of the things we've seen with Sure Admin is this ability to now do all of that management using public key infrastructure. So generating a public, generating a key pair, taking the public key, distributing it to all of your machines, and then that's the only way that those configuration settings can get managed from then on, is by someone who has the private key. And that then gives you obviously the it greatly simplifies your ability to manage all of those settings. You're not having to maintain these crazy spreadsheets, and there's no excuse at that point for not turning those security features on and using them.
Yeah, and then also the element of recovery, right? So if we had a recent customer engagement where they were looking at, they had been hit by ransomware. They were looking to make sure it never happened again, and only to find out that on the device they had a way that had they turned it on, they could have recovered that one device within a minute or so, and it would have gone back to a known good state, and then the user would have been able to move on. And the operational integrity of compromised state is, yes, a function of technology and solutions, but in a remote environment, and as hard as it is to find hardware today, how are you getting me a new PC, a new laptop, when this device is bricked and it's been compromised? And then you image it and you manage it and you patch it, right? So, to me, the operational integrity component is not just a function of how do I find a way of defining least privilege and giving myself a very secure way of administering my environment or doing remote access. It is that full life cycle of endpoint management and security.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is more, there's more destructive malware around now than perhaps there was a few years ago. And certainly companies that have experienced that, it's been hugely expensive for them. If malware wipes the master boot record and stops that machine from booting, it can do that in a millisecond. That machine is just going to display a missing operating system prompt, and indeed, plenty of the recovery solutions that are built into machines rely on there being stuff left on the disk to do the recovery. If you don't, if malware has wiped that, there's going to be no recovery happening. That's why you need those kind of recovery features actually built into the firmware, built into the hardware and the firmware of the machine, to actually enable that machine to recover itself, whether that's using the firmware to connect over a network, even a Wi-Fi network, to some server in the cloud or some on-premise network. But these days, why it makes more sense to put it in the cloud, and then to pull down that image and put it onto the machine, and then obviously boot into it. Of course, there are also approaches where you can actually put additional storage device, solid state storage device on the machine, actually connected to that security controller I was talking about. And that security controller then has got access to that device. It can ensure that malware can't delete the contents of it. And then you can do the re-imaging from there. And obviously, you're not having to download a large image over the network. You can be back up and running far more quickly if the security controller is just writing that image back to the SSD and getting you back up and running in minutes.
Yeah, well, I think we've covered from the design elements to hardware building. We didn't touch on supply chain, but I think that we can save that for another call. but yeah, I think that ultimately it's about how does one take what's built in and designed into the device and actually apply a modern approach and a modern architecture to solving these challenges. And I think, Ian, thanks very much for bringing the topic of operational integrity in a compromised state. So many enterprises today could benefit from it. It's designed in. We have obviously technologies that we could add to the mix, but fundamentally it comes down to trust and the root of trust. And it really does come down to least privilege. So Ian, thanks for doing this with us.
Yeah, that's been fun.
Wonderful.